Let's go to the first step, the carbs.
If they're brand new to this and want to lose weight, I think carb timing is the most important thing.
Step 2, healthy fats.
Butter, tallow, lard, things like that I think are going to be the best. The lifestyle fixes, as we're going to talk about, are really pretty easy to implement.
Mike Mutzel is a world-renowned metabolic expert and the creator of High Intensity Health,
helping millions understand how their body actually works.
Today, he's revealing a simple 10-step action plan to reduce visceral fat.
Higher rates of cancer with abdominal fat, higher rates of heart disease, higher rates of strokes, higher rates of diabetes. 20 to 25% of so-called lean people or skinny people have this metabolically unhealthy fat. So it's not just the visibly overweight. From a circadian rhythm perspective, the more calories you can have earlier in the day, the better you will be in terms of overall body composition. That being said, I think exercise is hands down the most important thing you can do. A combination of aerobic training, HIIT training, and resistance training will go a long way.
You're a fan of...
It literally drops your blood sugar in real time. There's so many tools at our fingertips. Something very simple like mouth taping can have a disproportionately large impact. We just actually have to commit to doing it.
Most of us try to lose fat for how we look, but there is a dangerous type of fat that most people don't even know about. It hides deep around our organs, releasing toxic cytokines that can lead to inflammation, insulin resistance, and even disease. It is called visceral fat, and almost everyone has it, even people who look thin. Today, I'm joined by the wonderful Mike Mutzel. He's a nutrition expert and founder of High Intensity Health. You're about to learn the fastest and easiest way to get rid of visceral fat in just 30 days. But here's the weird part. There is no cardio. There is no fasting. There is no keto. It is something much more simpler that actually works. So Mike, my first question, is it possible to get rid of visceral fat in just 30 days if we follow the strategy that we're about to talk about?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on. I think it's really possible. And one of the areas that we start to lose fat first is actually around the abdomen, around the face. And so I think, when we start to exercise, start to walk, start to compress our feeding window, minimize consumption of ultra-processed foods, sauna, all of these things have a synergistic and additive effect. And it is very possible. I've seen significant changes in a short period of time looking at bioimpedance testing or DEXA testing with regards to visceral fat. So absolutely.
Amazing. You must have helped so many people with their health journeys. Is there anyone that stands out for you as somebody that has lost a lot of belly fat, visceral fat by following your protocols?
Yeah, it's a great question. I meet with clients all the time, all over the world, and it's really surprising how quickly and I should say, let me rephrase that, how small little lifestyle changes. I was working with an individual last night who just started mouth taping. He had sleep apnea for many years, watched a video back in 2017, started mouth taping, and his, everything about his energy and his ability to go to the gym and, have more time for cooking meals with his family has improved. With that small little thing that most people, when you say taping your mouth shut, while you're sleeping, would think that that's a conspiracy theory or it wouldn't really do anything. So these small little lifestyle shifts actually have a huge effect on increasing the momentum there's a business book called Good to Great, and it's all about spinning the flywheel and how these big businesses, Amazon, Microsoft, Expedia, they're constantly moving the flywheel in different directions, and that's how they become startups to, trillion-dollar companies in some cases. Well, when it comes to health, we really need to move that flywheel. And so, the more that we walk during the day, the more sleep pressure we'll have at night, and the better our sleep quality is, the more likely we are to exercise the next day and have more resistance towards ultra-processed, impulsive, foods. So, something very simple like mouth taping or minimizing alcohol consumption can have a disproportionately large impact on someone's body composition.
Absolutely. It's very exciting. Very interesting about mouth taping, which I didn't know. Maybe I should try that. Although I don't have visceral fat, but if I tried the mouth taping, I think that could improve one's sleep anyway, especially if they have sleep apnea. So next question for you. What do you think is the most surprising thing that people might not know about visceral fat that you know about that they don't know?
Yeah, I think the most surprising thing, and I wrote this book called Belly Fat Effect back in 2012, and I was just blown away at the number of immune cells that coalesce among our fat tissue around the abdomen. So when we think about fat, we've all seen these pictures of muscle and then fat, right? And we know that fat is really large in comparison to a small amount of muscle mass on a gram per gram basis. But when we think about belly fat in particular, the fat around the abdominal region, the intra-abdominal fat, it tends to be enriched in immune cells. Every immune cell possible you can think of, from monocytes, macrophages, T lymphocytes, the list goes on. And all these immune cells then start releasing all these pro-inflammatory signaling molecules, interleukins, cytokines, and beyond. And that creates a low-grade systemic inflammation around the abdomen, which is in close proximity to your liver, which is your most important metabolic organ in the body, as well as your heart and your pancreas and all these other organs. So we start to think of like, oh, this person has this belly. Like, it's no big deal. They just have like a beer belly. But really underneath that is this conglomeration of all these immune cells creating a cacophony of interleukins and cytokines and all these inflammatory molecules that are the direct cause of atherosclerosis and the progressive narrowing of our arteries that, of course, can lead to a major heart attack, a death from heart disease, as well as a stroke, for example. So it's really not so benign, and that's why I think it's really important for folks to take this seriously, take their lifestyle seriously, their nutrition seriously, because even biopsies show, and it goes on further, that, there's this phenomenon known as cellular senescence. And so when cells become dysfunctional, you eat a lot of junk food, you smoke cigarettes and are exposed to, say, heavy metals and so forth, cells start to behave aberrantly, and they should apoptose and die. And then new cells will then regenerate. And this is this process known as autophagy, as well as mitophagy and so forth within the mitochondria. Well, it turns out that when your cells kind of get infiltrated by all these different immune cells, particularly the fat tissue or the adipose tissue, these immune cells cause the other cells, they recruit other cells to behave more badly. So it starts to just accelerate cellular aging from the abdominal region out throughout the peripheral of the body. And so we start to see an accelerated pace of biologic aging. And there's this very great longitudinal study from New Zealand known as the Dunedin study that have tracked people for 40 plus years and looked at how various lifestyle factors, mindset, exercise, nutrition affects the pace of biologic aging. And I think this is really important as people get older because, I'm 43. There's people that are 43 that look better than me and look significantly older than me. So that differential between your chronologic age, what the odometer says, versus your biologic age is impacted by your immune system, believe it or not. And so that's where I think people should really sort of conceptualize that this body fat, particularly around the belly, is not benign. It's not inert. It is driving all of these, what we call in medicine, sequelae or pathophysiologic changes within the body that are really bad. And that's why we see higher rates of cancer with abdominal fat, higher rates of heart disease, higher rates of strokes, higher rates of autoimmunity, all the conditions, diabetes. So the list goes on. So nice thing here is there's a lot of bad stuff that can be attributed to this, but the lifestyle fixes, as we're going to talk about, are really pretty easy to implement.
Absolutely. How many people do you think, if you were to walk out on your street right now, and if I was to walk out on my street, how many people do you think might be walking around with visceral fat and they don't know it? Because you mentioned the big belly. Do you know how many people I see that have that beer belly? How many people would have that visceral fat?
It's pretty common. I would say 1 in 2. There's a age-related increase in this, but particularly males. Yeah, here in the U.S., I can't speak to Europe, or you're in Dubai, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it varies based upon ethnicity and age and all this, but it's really common here in the U.S. It's like 7 in 10 adults are either overweight or obese. And the interesting thing here is you don't need to be morbidly overweight or morbidly obese to have higher concentrations of belly fat. In fact, 20 to 25% of so-called lean people or skinny people have this metabolically unhealthy fat as well. So it's not just the visibly overweight. You do see this a lot in East Asian individuals who are pretty lean and frail and so forth, and but then have a lot of visceral fat. And it really probably stems from the standard American diet. People, come to the US or come to Europe from other parts of the world where the food is much cleaner and homegrown and all this, and they start eating the ultra-processed food, and that's where the fat goes first, generally. So it's a lot higher than you would think, and that's what's kind of scary about it.
I want to ask you when it comes to visceral fat. So, when it comes to fat loss, you must see on the internet about calories, all about calories. Then people talk about hormones. So pertaining to visceral fat, do you think it's more the hormones or do you think it's the calories?
Yeah, I think it's impossible to totally disentangle the calories from the conversation and excess energy, of course. But the hormonal influence is inarguably, it helps partition where those calories go. So you take someone, for example, who has arthritis, right? And they get put on prednisone or a corticosteroid. They start to gain fat around the abdomen and around the face and so forth. And they're probably not changing their diet that much. So hormones play a huge role. And cortisol, for example, there is a hormone called 11-beta steroid dehydrogenase, I think, and it can make active cortisol around the abdominal tissue. So the more sort of stressed you get, the more localized cortisol can be produced from your fat tissue. And in men, we also have the enzyme aromatase. So as estrogen increases, our fat cells release this enzyme that can take testosterone and rip it into estrogen. So yeah, I think the hormones play a massive role. And that's why, focusing on all the lifestyle interventions, like just having a good night's sleep, for example, will increase testosterone. Exercising at the right time of the day can modulate cortisol levels. So, of course, energy balance really matters, but I think the hormones play a massive role. And so that's why I think blood work is good. One of the hormones that tends to decline first in both men and women is DHEA, dihydroepiandrosterone. And this is a precursor to both testosterone and estrogen. It's made by the adrenal glands as well as the ovaries. And this is really important for women as they go through peri and post-menopause because the ovaries stop making androgens altogether. And so we're relying only on the adrenal glands. And so for women, really important to consider DHEA during peri and post-menopause. For men as well, I work with men all the time who have low testosterone, but their DHEA is often low in the outset as well. And so because that's really accessible, it's really affordable. A bottle of DHEA is like, $19 or something for several months. So I often recommend people take DHEA first before getting on HRT. And also as we age, cortisol is the only hormone, curiously, that doesn't decrease with age. It actually increases as we age. And so the nice thing about DHEA is there's evidence to suggest that it can inhibit cortisol release. And so by taking DHEA at night as you get older, 45, 50, and beyond, can help you have better sleep because we know that cortisol can compromise sleep quality and sleep duration. So hormones, very important, but I suggest starting with the basics. Insulin, cortisol, DHEA.
Okay, I have to ask you about insulin because everyone talks about insulin resistance. If you have more visceral fat, is that going to feed or exacerbate elevated insulin and therefore insulin resistance?
It's a great question. I think there's a lot of heterogeneity in people who have, insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome and belly fat, for example. I work with some clients who, when I see them on Zoom or what have you, they look like their triglycerides would be 500. They would have a fasting insulin of like 30. And sometimes their triglycerides are like 60. And so their body's really good at partitioning that extra energy into body fat. And I meet with some people who look really lean, like yourself. And, for example, their liver is filled with fat. Their liver enzymes are like 60 or above. And so I think there's a lot of diversity here. I don't think it's as clear cut as we might make it out to be, in terms of like the low carb circles and all these seminars and stuff. I think there's a lot of inter-individual variability in that. But that being said, of course, insulin does impact, partitioning of fat and beyond. And so I like to recommend people do both fasted and non-fasted blood work. So, the first time you do labs, whether it's Function Health, there's all these other labs, or you can go direct now to LabCorp here in the US and Quest. But get your fasted insulin first, liver enzymes, there's 3 of them, ALT, AST, GGT, hemoglobin A1C, and then triglycerides, of course, along with ApoB to A1 ratio. That will give you a pretty good idea of overall metabolic health. And then next time you do your labs, maybe it's 3 months or 6 months later, do your labs non-fasted. Because atherosclerosis, insulin resistance, these are all post-meal or post-prandial phenomenon. So we don't really, people can fast for a couple of days and make their labs look really good, right? I mean, I remember my aunt when I was in high school, she's like, I'm getting blood work, I'm getting my physical, so I'm not eating, I'm exercising, to create this artificial scenario so that her doctor's impressed. But we really want to see what's going on in the post-meal state. So after you get your fasted set of labs, then you can go in and just eat a standard meal, whatever your habitual meal is, standard breakfast, standard lunch, and then test your labs about 90 minutes after that meal. And we're going to look at the same things, the insulin, the glucose, the A1C, the liver enzymes, triglycerides, and we want to see the differential. And that's where we can sort of disentangle and figure out, what is someone's problem? Is it the triglycerides? Is it the liver? Is it the insulin? And go from there. So that's kind of an interesting, and actually the medical community is slowly shifting to non-fasted labs for that reason.
Well, that'll be so much better because I think if somebody gets their labs done, they have to fast. How annoying is it? I recently quit coffee, but no coffee, no tea, just water and nothing to eat. So if you can have non-fasting labs, that's quite interesting. What would you expect if somebody has fasted labs and non-fasting labs pertaining to insulin or, for example, triglycerides? Would you see a small increase in them, or how do you know if something is bad if it's non-fasted?
Yeah, well, that's why it's nice to have the baseline of fasted to compare the difference. And so we often, first of all, there's really no physiologic reason why someone should have a high fasting insulin. So insulin is a post-meal hormone that helps process and sort of take energy out of the system and put it, glycogen into our muscles and put, insulin is anabolic. It helps with muscle protein synthesis and so on. There's really no physiologic need for high fasting insulin. So that's a red flag if it is above, say, 5 or 7 units fasting. But what we like to really look at is, the glucose, the insulin, and the triglycerides are actually really important. And so if we see a doubling of the triglycerides in the post-meal window in a comparing fasted to non-fasted, that would suggest that there is some insulin resistance and metabolic dyslipidemia, for example. And so that just puts that person at a higher risk of developing all these conditions. And so people like to know, well, what do you do? Well, walk after a meal, not consume as many processed carbohydrates and things of the sort. So that's what I would look at. But yeah, there's a bunch of literature. I like to recommend people use Perplexity or ChatGPT to help them better understand what are the consequences of increased post-meal triglyceride levels and things like that. Hypertriglyceridemia is the medical term to help people understand this. And this is actually independently correlated and more statistically associated with rates of and events when it comes to cardiovascular disease compared to LDL. You take a type 2 diabetic, oftentimes their LDL or so-called bad cholesterol tends to decline as the disease progresses, not the other way around. But in those cases, the triglycerides are increasing. So we often see there's not this tight correlation with LDL cholesterol increasing with disease pathology in people. But we see the triglycerides, statistically, speaking across many different populations, will invariably increase as someone gets more metabolically unhealthy. So that's a marker that I really like to look at. And it's really simple. It's cheap. It's easy to test. And then you can compare the fasted triglycerides to non-fasted triglycerides to see really what the difference is there. And that's one of the reasons why, to be honest, I stopped drinking bulletproof coffee. This was really popular, people, and more butter, the better, MCT oil and this. And I found that, when I was doing that after a couple of years, my non-fasted triglycerides were over 200, whereas my fasted triglycerides are like 60, sometimes 59 or, 54, depending upon how much exercise I'm doing. And so seeing that massive swing, so the cut points for most people, at least using the units that we look at here, milligrams per deciliter. Over 200 really is not ideal, but especially over 220 is kind of that threshold where we start to see problems in handling lipids and energy that's coming in. So liquid fat and fried foods, those tend to be the most problematic fats, in my opinion.
That is so interesting that you're doing bulletproof coffee, because I know that you were keto before. So now we're going to go into the 10 steps to reduce visceral fat, help reduce it, starting in just 30 days. But I know that you were doing keto before. I'm curious to know for you, what do you think might be most important, since you're heavily into exercise, which I am as well. I like exercise. Do you think diet's more important, or do you think exercise for visceral fat reduction?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say exercise, to be honest, Rena.
Me too. I think the same thing now. I used to think diet, but now I think exercise.
Yeah. Well, look at fitness models. There's a lot of fitness models on Instagram who exercise a lot and they eat like crap. They're doing, cheat days with a bunch of donuts, and they're having like popsicle flavored protein with crap in it, right? So I think exercise is really important. Now, that doesn't mean, if you eat a crappy diet, you have to exercise more. But I think you can eat an okay diet, and if you exercise a lot, you're going to be generally okay. And so that's what I think about this. I mean, look at Europeans, for example. Europeans generally eat a lot more bread and pasta and all these, carbohydrate-rich foods. They smoke at orders of magnitude more compared to here in North America, but they walk a lot. And so you don't see the rates of heart disease and all these metabolic-related complications like you do here in North America. So even, smoking we know to be one of the worst things you could possibly do for your health. And especially in France and Spain and Portugal, people smoke like crazy, but they move a lot more than we do here in America. So I think exercise is hands down the most important thing you can do. A combination of aerobic training, HIIT training, and resistance training will go a long way.
Now, as Mike mentions, if you want to get rid of visceral fat, bump up the exercise. At the same time, do one thing. Lower the carbohydrates, because that is the ultimate low insulin state. Now, as you start lowering the carbs, or even trying zero carb, also known as the carnivore diet, you might experience some side effects like headache, nausea, and fatigue. Now, all this is very normal, especially at the beginning. So what you can do is do the salt trick. Simply add some high quality salt to your meals and also add it to your water. But if your symptoms still persist, you might want to consider adding in electrolytes, specifically one that has sodium, potassium, and magnesium, because that is so important for your brain and also for your bodily function. And that is why I have Element as a sponsor of today's episode. Now, I like to use a high quality supplement like Element because it has a science-backed mix of sodium, potassium, and magnesium without anything artificial and no preservatives. And I like to use the raw unflavored option every morning in my morning coffee, and the rest I sprinkle in my water during the day. And right now, Element is offering my viewers this free sample pack on every order. So you're going to get 8 single servings of Element to try for free. So if you want this, just head to drinkelement.com/the Primal Podcast. It's very easy to negate the benefits of exercise and say, I don't have to exercise because I'm really strict on the diet. I eat zero carb and therefore there's going to be very less insulin spikes. However, as we'll talk about, the benefits of exercise is so important. When Mike says people that smoke or eat averagely healthy, we're not advocating for people to do that. However, that's to show the importance of exercise as opposed to being super, super strict on your diet. Both is important. But the piece about exercise is showing a lot of promise when it comes to visceral fat, dementia, heart disease, et cetera, et cetera. Let's go to the first step of our 10-step piece to reduce visceral fat. The carbs. How many carbs do you think an average person can eat if they moderately exercise and eat kind of healthy?
I don't know that I can just throw out a number. I would say maybe depending upon the body weight of the individual. And I think carb timing is the most important thing. You can eat a relatively high carbohydrate so long as you have it in the post-exercise window or intra-workout. Most of those carbohydrates will be utilized to replenish muscle glycogen from exercise. But I think for the average person who's training average, at the gym and doing some CrossFit style stuff or, Olympic lifts or power lifts or what have you, 30 to 60 grams of carbs per day is probably if they're brand new to this and want to lose weight, I think that's probably pretty safe. And then have some days where it's lower carb, maybe 25, 30 grams, and some days where they're north of 100 grams. So I think having this variability is more important than just being very dogmatic and strict about this, and particularly having carbs around exercise. I think when people are new to this and they start going to the gym and they do a really low carb diet, they can have lackluster or just terrible workouts because they have no glycogen and so forth. And so I think strategically timing your carbohydrates around exercise is a good idea. So that's the way that I like to talk about it because, carbs aren't the villain. If you're doing high rocks training, for example, or you're training CrossFit, like carbs are your friend. Like you're doing that keto is really going to be challenging. Now, if you're an ultra runner, like doing that keto is fine. Like you're burning fat for most of those exercise sessions. So I think being strategic around it, but if we were to throw out a number, I'd say ideally probably less than 50 grams per day.
Where do these carbs come from? The carbs that are not going to go into visceral fat and they're going to be used for exercise?
Yeah, like the food sources.
Yeah.
Yeah, the food, fruit, tubers, things like that I think are really health promoting. Sometimes sprouted rice, sourdough bread, those would be sort of the carbs that you might, include into the diet for those individuals. Yeah.
Okay. If somebody's carnivore and they're like, oh my God, Mike, I'm carnivore, I'm not eating carbs and I want to exercise, what would you say for that person?
I think that's fine. You're just going to have fattier cuts of meat. to get some of your calories. So that's the thing. So, if you're doing a lot of New York steaks or top sirloins where it's just really lean, if you're going to be carnivore, and carnivore can be great for a lot of people, especially people that have autoimmunity or gastrointestinal issues, ulcerative colitis and Crohn's and things like that. Carnivore can be absolutely amazing. But I do think for some people, adding back in fruit and things like that periodically can be helpful. So yeah, I think, and there's a season for this as well. As we get into the winter here in North America, I think carnivore makes the most sense in the world. I look outside, I used to have pears and apples and grapes and blueberries. There's zero edible fruits here in North America right now, if you're north of San Francisco, growing. So what do we have more? We have more bone broth, more soups and stews, and more carnivore style approach. So I think just approaching, your diet more seasonally, I think makes a lot of sense as well.
Yep, I understand. Okay, so that was step 1, carbs. 30 to 60 grams of carbs seems quite good. If you're carnivore, fantastic, good for autoimmunity and gut health. Step 2, healthy fats. This is a question. What do you think is the best fat that people should eat to fix their visceral fat and also for their overall health?
Gosh, honestly, I'm biased, but I think animal fats, so butter, tallow, even cooking with lard, things like that, I think are going to be the best. But that being said, soaked and sprouted nuts and seeds, I think periodically are going to be okay. Avocado is a great fat, one of my favorite, fruit fats. Coconut fat, I think is great, so people can eat real coconut or cook with coconut oil, things like that. Olive oil, I think, can be helpful as well. I generally advise away from the refined, sort of seed oils and cottonseed, canola, things like that. But animal fat is, I think, amazing. It's what a lot of humans have been eating for, centuries. So that's what I lean more towards.
And how do you balance your carbohydrates versus your fat? Next, we'll talk about protein, but imagine your protein is 1 gram per pound of lean body mass. How do you eat your fat grams? How much fat would you eat in a day?
Yeah, it's a great question. I haven't tracked for decades, but I used to. I think it's good for people to get a good pulse on where things are at by using a macro counter or a tracker to kind of see. But yeah, I just follow a more intuitive approach. I know that's not what people want to hear. But if I'm eating lower carbs, I'll just have fattier cuts of meat. And I don't add in fat. I'll cook with some butter and things like that, but I'm not pouring in extra fat intentionally like that. So that's how I track it. So again, if you're having leaner cuts, for example, if you're eating boneless, skinless chicken breast, there's basically no fat in there. So you definitely want to be, and you're low carb, you're going to be needing calories from somewhere, especially if you're exercising. So yeah, you might want to add in avocado. You might want to add in whole eggs, things of that sort, because you're really not getting many calories in that context. And if you're trying to train and, lift and all that, that's going to be hard. So I recommend an intuitive approach, but not overdoing. Some people gain weight on keto because they're overdoing it. Keto cookies, keto snacks, and so forth. So as long as the fat sources, in my opinion, are from whole foods and you're not adding in a lot of liquid fat, I think you're probably okay in terms of following an intuitive approach and eating your meals more slowly, chewing thoroughly so that you have that true satiety.
Perfect. And that's what I would say as well in terms of get your fat potentially from the meat as opposed to adding, there's people adding sticks of butter. And if it works for people, it's fine. But generally speaking, for you and I, and you're 43, I'm 42, so similar age group, I don't add fat to my meat. I just eat meat and I eat mostly meat. But I don't add butter. I cook in butter and I cook in fat, but mostly it's the meat. Next one is protein. How much protein do you think most people should be having in a day?
I think you threw out that number, 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight. I think that's really good. But, I think people that are new to exercise or that are, the interesting thing as we get older, I know you've probably talked about this before, is muscle protein synthesis tends to decline with age. We're more prone to losing muscle. It's known as sarcopenia and so forth. So I think actually as we get older, we should increase the amount of protein that we have in relation to our body weight. And then people that are new to exercise, or people that have underlying disease going on, if they're insulin resistant, they're have some inflammation, we know that all those conditions sort of increase cachexia or wasting of muscle. So yeah, it varies, from 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight, all the way up to maybe 2 grams per pound, if someone's really active. So I think, again, the way that we look at carbs, okay, if you're going to exercise a lot, have more carbs. If you're exercising a lot, increase the amount of protein, particularly if you're new to exercise. So I just had this stupid hernia procedure injury. And so like I'm getting just back into exercise now after like 5 weeks of being sedentary. So I'm having a lot more protein. I'm sore again from like the exercises that I did 6 weeks ago, and like now they're making me more sore. So you need more protein, right? So I think being able to have this flexible mindset is ideal. But yeah, starting out at 1 to up to 1.5 grams per pound of ideal body weight, I think is good.
Perfect. And that would be definitely over 100 grams. If anyone's wondering how much that might be, it's well over 100 grams. Most people are actually not. Men can easily get there, but I think females don't tend to get that protein number. And I've seen more on social media, the likes of Nisha Berry and Laura Spath, they're trying to increase their protein, especially women hitting their 40s. There's a thing about sarcopenia. As women, they get older and they have to exercise, increase their muscle mass, and the protein goes into it. So that was carbs, fat, and protein. Obviously, that's what we have to eat. I want to talk about how we eat those meals and meal timing. What do you think about meal timing in regards to lowering of the visceral fat and also body fat and being healthy? What does that look like, the meal timing?
Yeah, this is where, again, we're going to sort of disagree with the people that say it's all about calorie balance and so forth. Various studies do show that people that eat later in the day and have a lot of calories later in the day tend to store more of those calories in the form of body fat, tend to have a harder time losing weight. So I think, and we talked about the hormones. We talked about insulin and cortisol and so forth. From a circadian rhythm standpoint, our gastrointestinal tract, GI motility, stomach acid, bile acids, and so forth, it's really primed to receive nutrients in the middle part of the day. And so that's when we, in my opinion, and based upon the circadian rhythm research and so forth, everyone knows about how light exposure in the morning is good for you. Well, it turns out that food exposure in the middle part of the day, it makes a lot of sense. That's when your gut is most primed to, break down and process the foods that you eat. So I think meal timing is good. 1 to 2 meals a day for most people. If they're sedentary, if they're exercising a lot, 3 meals, okay, fine. But trying to have more calories in the earlier part of the day compared to fasting all day and having this massive meal of 3,000 calories, for example. So yeah, I think, having a solid lunch and then a decent sized dinner is probably good for most people. But yeah, from a circadian rhythm perspective, the more calories you can have earlier in the day, the better you will be in terms of overall body composition.
And do you think that snacking, so involving in that, I'm sure people would be having bulletproof coffee or butter in their coffee and then maybe having some snacks. Do you think those snacks, which could be spikes in insulin, could also feed visceral fat as well as adipose fat?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure on that, honestly. I know that we hear this all the time, like this food will break your fast or this thing, I think it's contingent upon the dose of food, right? So, and how much exercise you're doing, right? So again, when it comes to autophagy and these hormones and all these things, if you're moving and exercising a lot, like you have some cream in your coffee and you take your dog for a walk in the morning, that's probably a wash, right? The exercise would probably negate whatever theoretical rise in insulin would come from the cream or the butter in the coffee or whatever the thing is. So I think it really depends upon the dose. I don't know that snacking is as problematic as we've made it out to be. There's one study people can Google. It's like nibbling versus gorging, and it's actually conducted in women, comparing young women versus people, I think women over the age of 50. And they actually had these women over 50 not have as much snacks and have like 2 bolus meals versus like 5 or 6 meals in the snacking group. And there wasn't a lot of changes outside of muscle mass, actually. So the women that had this big bolus amount of higher amounts of protein tended to, as they got older, put on more, help preserve muscle mass. So I think that there maybe is something to that. People can Google this study if they would like. But honestly, I think a small little snack, probably not that big of a deal. But if you're snacking all of the time and you're not moving, that's problematic. So I think, it really depends on activity. But I don't think snacking is as terrible as we've made it out to be.
Especially if it's protein. I did an episode with Dr. Mike Ormsby, and he's a scientist that did some studies in terms of protein before bed. So like a whey protein shake, cottage cheese, 30 minutes prior to bed. And it did not show any increase in lipolysis or more fat, but it did show an increase in resting metabolic rate, recovery, and just positives around it. But it was that, 100 calories, 150 calories, so a snack just before bed, and it's protein. It's not fat, it's not carbs. So I think if somebody wants to snack, protein's always a good thing. And people can easily eat fat and carbs, but not protein. So if we could eat more protein, it's pretty good. Next tip, which is to reduce visceral fat. Autophagy. What do you think of autophagy for that?
Yeah, well, I mean, this has been an exciting aspect of physiology for a lot of years. People get really geeked out on this and so forth. Rena, this is going on in our bodies right now. Everyone listening, there's autophagy increasing and decreasing. It's very tissue specific. It's much more nuanced than I think people have appreciated. So is autophagy important? Absolutely. But is it always a good thing? Not necessarily. In some cancer cells, there's an increased rate of autophagy. So, what do we make of this? I think overall, we know what increases health-promoting autophagy. Exercise is hands down the best way to increase autophagy. All the adaptations that occur from exercise, that soreness that you feel in the muscle, there's actually breakdown of the muscle satellite cells and making them bigger, and it's called hypertrophy, right? So autophagy is really important for exercise, way more important than fasting, I feel like. And people that exercise and do intermittent fasting have a significant increase in autophagy. I've talked about this study numerous times where subjects were randomized based upon their VO2 max level. There was like 30 subjects in each arm, and the investigators had these people fast for 36 hours and measured different proteins in the body that are known to be autophagy initiation proteins. Well, it turns out that people who exercised and had a high VO2 max had a orders of magnitude higher amounts of all of the autophagy initiation proteins throughout the duration of the fast. In contrast, people who didn't exercise, even though they fasted for 36 hours, just like the exercisers, didn't really achieve any significant increase in autophagy, even though they were fasting for 36 hours. So the important lever here, in my opinion, is if we want to harness the theoretical benefits of autophagy, is we need to regularly exercise. And that makes our cellular machinery in our liver, in our brain, in our muscles, all the organs where we actually care about the enhancement of autophagy, more efficient. So what does that mean? We need to go to the gym. We need to walk at least 12,000 steps per day. Resistance training at least minimum 3 days per week, hopefully 4 or 5. So all of those factors will make any fasting or autophagy processes enhanced, whether you're taking spermidine or NAD or all these supplements, it's just going to enhance it. So I'm very biased with this, but based upon what the research actually shows. So yeah, think exercise and autophagy.
Well, what's easier for most people, like not eating for 3 days or doing some exercise? I would say doing some exercise is easier, especially for the endpoint of autophagy.
Totally. And if you exercise, you just enhance all the benefits of fasting. It's like a no-brainer.
Okay, so let's drill into the exercise. So what do you do for exercise during the week, like before when you could exercise or when you're getting back into it now?
Yeah, so normally I'll take my dogs on a little hike. I'm kind of fortunate that I have this hill in my behind my house, and we can do like a 2 mile. Like there's some undulating terrain, some hills and ups and downs and so forth. So I do that in the morning, and then in the afternoon I strength train 4 to 5 days per week, and then I'll try to do some longer zone 2 type stuff on the weekend, whether it's a longer run or a longer hike. So and the research shows between 9 and 12,000 steps per day people should be getting. Ideally, not all at once, dispersed throughout the day. I think that's health promoting. And then strength training. And so this could be anything. This could be, bodyweight exercises. It could be CrossFit. It could just be, Olympic lifting or bro bodybuilding. But, focusing on compound movement. So a compound movement is moving 2 or more joints at the same time. So I see a lot of people that go to the gym, they do preacher curls, they do tricep extensions, leg extensions, and they call it good. They haven't done any compound lifts in that. So we're talking about, cleans, presses, bench press, military press for shoulders, squats, hip hinges, like hip thrust and deadlifts. When you're moving 2 or more joints at the same time, you're incorporating your core oftentimes, the brain. Actually, you take people that are new to exercise, the earliest adaptations from exercise are within the brain and the central nervous system, not the muscle. So this is really good for aging, increasing brain-derived neurotrophic factor, preventing age-related cognitive decline. I mean, exercise is amazing for that reason. So and working with a trainer, and now with ChatGPT, I mean, I feel bad for some trainers that may be hearing this, but like you can tell ChatGPT to give you a customizable workout, and it's pretty good for free. So, I would, periodize your exercise. There's a great book by Brett Contreras. It's called Glute Lab. That is an excellent resource. So there's so many tools at our fingertips. We just actually have to commit to doing it.
Now, as Mike mentions, exercise is really potent to get rid of visceral fat and also enhance the effects of autophagy, which is cellular cleaning of your cells. And along with this idea of cell cleaning, we need to think about clean products that goes on our skin, because chemicals in our skincare like parabens and phthalates can cause disease and disrupt hormones, and they can lead to insulin resistance, because whatever goes on your skin can enter your bloodstream. It can reach your brain, penetrate your cells, potentially causing long-term health issues. And when I found this out, that made me stop and think, because I've healed so much through a primal lifestyle. But I realized I was still exposing myself to harmful chemicals through my skincare. And that's why we launched the Primal Tallow Balms and Soaps, which is our chemical-free skincare solution. And it's packed full of vitamins A, D, E, and K2. There's no nasties, there's no preservatives. It is no artificial scents. There is just one ingredient: grass-fed, grass-finished tallow. And I've been using the unscented soap and tallow balm every single day. And honestly, it's been a game changer. Both products for me have improved my skin texture, my hydration, and a little goes a long way. Like this is the tallow balm. This has lasted me for 2 months already, and I use it every day on my face and body. And great news, our USA store is now open, and that means faster shipping and cheaper prices. And right now, the Primal's offering 30% discount store-wide for the next 7 days. So if you want to try the soaps or these balms, just head to theprimal.com/discount. There's also a link in the description. What do you think is an order if somebody's just sitting on their butt on the couch, Mike? They're not doing much. They're having like maybe carnivore, ketogenic diet, and they're not doing exercise. What should they start doing? And then can you talk about sprinting as well?
Yeah. So I think sprinting is really important. And effective too. Cynthia Monteleone and I have done a lot of podcasts on sprinting technique and the benefits of sprinting. She is a sprinter as well as a coach to Olympic athletes and so forth. Sean Baker's just up the road from me, so I've done some training with him, and he's training to be really fast and compete in the 100-meter sprint. And so, but he's done a lot of proprioceptive work and tendon, maintenance to ensure that the loads, especially because he's a very strong athlete, the loads that sprinting can impose upon the tendons can be a lot if you're strong. So I think working with a coach and being more diligent about that. But what I do, if someone's new to this and they want to start sprinting, I would just do hill sprints. That's going to be, I would say if you're brand new to this, never exercise, start out with a month of walking 15,000 steps per day and doing like 30-minute walks. Just really build up your aerobic base so that you have that capillary density, the mitochondrial density, and then slowly add in intensity to that. And instead of sprinting right away, it could be hill repeats that are really high-speed walking at like 9 miles an hour or, 8 miles an hour, for example. And then slowly ramp up, to where you're doing a full-blown, 100-meter sprint. But yeah, I think the main question here is intensity really matters. And these quote-unquote sprints can be on the Concept 2 rower. They can be on the ski erg. They can be on the Echo Rogue bike, the bike that has also the arm element to it. So focusing on wattage instead of calories being burned or time. And so I train all the people that I work out with. I used to be a trainer. I don't do it anymore, but like family members, when we go to the gym and they're new to the ski erg or they're new to the Concept 2, I switch the settings so it's on power so they can see watts. And so my daughter, for example, when we do the ski erg, we're trying to hit 250 watts for at least 20 seconds, which, she's 13 years old. So that's a lot for her. My mom, she was like, oh, I'm doing the ski erg. And I looked at the watts. It was 60 watts. I'm like, Mom, we're not doing a lot here. Like you should do a little bit more. When I do the ski erg, I try to hit 650 watts, for 20 seconds. And so focusing on power will help people understand the intensity. And so the intensity really can be profound. And so it can be in the form of sprinting, but it can also start with the rower, the ski erg, the Echo bike.
I love that. I like the low impact because I think the idea about sprinting and running can be a bit scary for most people if they're just starting, especially going up the hill. But the rowing is good. And when you say skier, is that like that machine that you're doing this?
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
really hard. I've tried that before. It kills your back, and that's amazing. 650 watts. Well done, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, that's really good for your core too. And so I cross-country ski in the winter. And so that's really good training for cross-country skiing, which if anyone has not done that exercise yet, it's arguably the best exercise in the world. Cross-country skiers tend to have a higher VO2 max than both swimmers as well as runners. So it's an awesome sport if people haven't gotten into it.
And would you recommend that people test their VO2 max or do some VO2 max training? Or if they're just starting out, don't worry about that one yet?
You know, I think test it. I think it's good. I do my VO2 max test every year on my birthday or around my birthday. I think it's good because theoretically your VO2 max should decrease with age, but it doesn't have to. So I've increased my VO2 max every year since I started testing in 2023. So yeah, I would strongly recommend people it sucks. Have you done yours yet?
No, I've seen the Peter Attia videos. I'm like, oh, that sucks. Like, I don't want to like run and have this thing.
Yeah.
I'm just getting back into exercising. So a bit of background about me. My father passed away from frontotemporal dementia 2 months ago. And I started exercising quite intensely at the start of this year, but I really ramped it up since this last few months. And more in my podcast, I'm talking more about exercise because it is so important. And you want to do all of these facets, the walking, VO2 max, the sprinting, the resistance training, everything that you can do. But I haven't tested it yet, but I might do it.
Yeah, just for fun, just to see where you're at, and then to see what steps you've taken to go forward. And the nice thing about the VO2 max, real quick, is it's the best functional test because you're incorporating your cardiovascular system, your respiratory system, your neurologic system, your musculoskeletal system. So it is the culmination of all of these different systems. And so if that is off or low, and research actually shows this, your risk of dying from heart disease and other conditions is orders of magnitude higher. So this can be the catalyst to let people know, like, hey, all these systems are not integrating well. You need to make a shift. And so that's why I think, if nothing else, it's good for the motivation.
Love it. Love it. Okay, next one, sauna. Does that impact visceral fat, belly fat, or any fat at all?
Yeah, I don't know that there's any evidence to suggest. I'm sure there's some mechanisms that are increased, but that we don't really have good evidence to suggest that sauna therapy will directly cause weight loss or specifically visceral fat loss. However, we know that sauna therapy is an exercise mimetic. So what does that mean? So sauna mimics all of the cardiorespiratory and musculoskeletal effects of exercise without having to exercise. Now, that doesn't mean that you can swap one for the other. They're complementary modalities. So we should exercise and, in my opinion, go in the sauna. That's the order of operations. And sauna, I think, is wonderful for how it affects the circulatory system, blood flow, microcirculation, lowers blood pressure, and then also, the least of which I think it doesn't get talked a lot about, and that is detoxification. So we are all exposed to persistent organic pollutants, heavy metals, insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, and the way that we can excrete these compounds is either through the urine or through pooping or through sweat. And so obviously having regular bowel movements is very health promoting, but sweating is a phenomenal way to do this. There was a study called the Blood, Urine, Sweat Study from Stephen Jennis in Alberta, Canada, and he had people do hot yoga and sauna and all these different things and looked and enumerated the toxins that were released from the sweat. And it turns out that sauna is phenomenal for helping our bodies purge, these harmful chemicals, which are unquestionably linked with obesity. So that's, I think, the important thing to consider. So if nothing else, sauna several days a week to get rid of the crap it's everywhere. It's in our clothing, it's in our food, it's in our cosmetics, it's in furniture, right, Rena? I think you probably know this. There's flame retardants, at least in North America. It was mandated by law to have these perfluoro flame retardants in furniture. And what happens, that breaks down, it gets into our household dust, we inhale it, it's all not good. So we all need to strive to eradicate these compounds. So I think sauna is great for that.
Okay, it says here that sauna also activates brown fat and heat shock proteins. What is heat shock proteins?
Yeah, so heat shock proteins are intracellular proteins that help with adaptation and stress. And so these are also increased during exercise too. And so they have immune properties, they have the ability to initiate autophagy and so forth. So there's HSP 70, HSP 50. There's all sorts of subtypes of these proteins based upon where they are in the body. I think they're really exciting. We can't directly measure heat shock protein, so I don't really talk about it that much because most people don't, it doesn't mean a lot to them. But I think one of the best ways to figure out if sauna is helping you is to start to regularly monitor your blood pressure. What you'll notice is that if you're regularly saunaing, your morning blood pressure will actually go down. And there's a great cuff called Connect, CONNEQT, Connect. It's a phenomenal blood pressure cuff. It looks at augmentation index and all these other aspects, which are really cool. So that's what I like to focus on. But yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of mechanisms by which sauna is very health promoting. And I think the heat shock protein one is up there.
Perfect. How much sauna should people do each week?
Okay, so Jari Laukkanen in Finland has done a lot of the epidemiological research showing that there is a linear increase with all the health promoting effects. So it's like more is better. So that's what I suggest. Now, I think, again, it's regionally dependent. If you live in Phoenix, Arizona, where it's 110 degrees in the summer and you're saunaing a lot, like that's going to be a lot. So for those of us that live in North America, and think about where sauna really sort of originated, and it's arguable whether it started in Russia or Finland or the combination of the two. But most people that are culturally, sauna is endemic in the culture. It's Scandinavian countries in Eastern Europe and cold parts of the world. And now we see, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Seattle, Washington, Boston, like all these little cities are becoming like sauna hubs now because they're in northern latitude. So I think it depends on where you live. But yeah, I think a minimum 3 days a week for most people, minimum, unless you live near the equator, right? Well, that's going to be a little bit different. And especially if you don't exercise. And I want to just throw out, it doesn't have to be the sauna. It can be a hot tub as well. One study actually randomized people to, this was an early study in like the 1990s, whereas full-blown type 2 diabetics dependent upon insulin and other drugs, they randomized people to either take a hot tub every night or not take a hot tub. And the people that went in the hot tub had a significant decrease in their A1C. I think the study was 8 or 10 weeks after. But they didn't change anything in their diet. So it just turns out that moving blood in circulation, that's, I think, the most important thing. And this is why exercise and walking is so good. You're moving blood and lymph. We talked about the visceral fat. Well, it turns out that our lymphatic system is the highway by which all of our immune cells navigate throughout our body. And when we sauna and cold plunge, we are moving our lymph. And I think there's not enough talked about with regards to lymph stagnation, although there's a lot of research about it. So this is why exercise, sauna, rebounding, hiking, sprinting, right? You're moving a lot of lymph when you sprint as well as blood. So yeah, but back to your question, I think more is better.
So the next one was the cold exposure and cold shower. So you mentioned that lymph. What is the lymph and how is that good?
It's a system of fluids that many of our immune cells navigate throughout the body in, and it's influencing tissue hydration and localized inflammation and so forth. And the lymphatic system, I think, is a whole podcast in and of itself about the benefits of moving lymph and lymph stagnation. But this is why I think cold plunges are particularly health promoting, because if we take the sauna, how does the body adapt? Why is sauna good for us? Well, it's causing increased vasodilation and removal of blood from the core to the periphery of the body. This naturally happens when you go from cold to hot. And then what's nice about contrast therapy, so getting hot on purpose and then getting cold on purpose and repeat, is that when you get cold, the inverse happens. All of the blood from the periphery, from your fingers to your skin and so forth, tends to migrate back to the core. It's an adaptive protective mechanism to protect your vital organs. And so you're sort of massaging both your lymph as well as your blood when you're doing contrast therapy. And I just think this is a health-promoting exercise or modality or intervention for people, because think about what we do most of the time. We're sitting in front of a desk or we're driving. We're not moving blood or lymph. And so using heat as a modality to help increase circulation overall probably helps with varicose veins, probably helps with stagnant circulation and circulatory issues and so forth. So cold is particularly health-promoting. as well as it activates all these, like you mentioned, brown fat earlier. So, it can cause your white fat is not just homogeneous. There's all sorts of different fat cells and fat cell subtypes and so forth. And metabolically healthy fat is enriched in this organelle that's, tacitly implied throughout our conversation called mitochondria that comprise about 10% of our body weight. And so when we get cold on purpose, we increase the density of mitochondria within our fat tissue, which influence calorie expenditure, resting metabolic rate, blood sugar health. I mean, there's all sorts of immune properties to fat tissue. So cold is, good for you. So try to get cold on purpose.
Okay, so my question is, when it comes to cold therapy, how cold does it have to be, and is there gender differences when it comes to cold?
Yeah, so this is super controversial. Stacy Sims says women should never get cold on purpose. Well, I don't know. If you've been to Copenhagen, you ever been to Helsinki, Finland, women are jumping in the ocean all the time, right? So I think it really depends upon, someone's resilience. You take someone who works a desk job, has never done a cold shower, and they're like, I'm going to cold plunge for 3 minutes every single day. And then also I think it depends on where women are at. If they're still cycling, are they in their follicular phase of their cycle or luteal phase? We know that the luteal phase is characterized by less stress resilience and things like that. So, but I think making these sweeping claims that women should never do this or should do that, there's nothing in medicine, nothing in exercise that is so universal across the board. And so, it depends on someone's life load. If they're super stressed out already, not sleeping, and then adding in, extended ice baths, that's probably going to push the pendulum too far in the wrong direction. But here's the thing about cold exposure is it acutely stressful? Absolutely. But the body responds in the post cold exposure therapy, and actually it increases heart rate variability. It can help reduce stress. So that's the thing I think that is sort of lost in the narrative. So the point is we shouldn't listen to people that make these absolute claims, because again, you go to Scandinavia, go to Norway, go to Sweden, Finland, Denmark. There's women cold plunging all the time. Like I was just there 3 weeks ago, and it's amazing just how many women are jumping in the ocean. Even in Ireland, people do this all the time. And so the UK. And so if we just listen to some expert said women shouldn't do this, but this has historically been going on for hundreds of years, and people benefit from that. So I think it's more important to listen to your body and see, how do you feel afterwards? Do you feel more calm, more resilient, or the opposite? And does it depend upon your life load and your cycle? So take a more intuitive approach to it, I think is a good way to do it.
Wow, I love that. So question, not with visceral fat, but with women, Dr. Stacey Sims says that women should eat within 30 minutes of waking up. Do you agree with that, or can they do a bit of fasting?
Yeah, I think, again, everyone's a little bit different, on that. So think about your body with different knobs, right? And it's all based upon where you're at right now. We have food, we have exercise, and we have fasting. If you have 100 pounds to lose, we got to be cranking all the knobs. We're going to be compressing our feeding window, eating cleaner foods, and exercising more. But if you're pretty lean like you are, Rena, then maybe we don't need to focus on so much fasting, right? We can open up our feeding window more. So I think it really depends upon where you're at, which is, how far you need to dial the knobs in. So I think people that have a lot of weight to lose and so forth, fasting in the mornings is fine for them. It really depends. So that's what I suggest on that. Now, if you're trying to build muscle and you're lean already, then yeah, when you start to develop some hunger in the morning, maybe after your walk or whatever, have some food. But this idea that we have to do this all the time, no matter what, I think gets us into trouble. And that's what we look at what we've done in the 1990s here, the food pyramid. We have to have 9 to 11 servings of whole grains every single day, every American. Look at the obesity, overweight epidemic as a result of that. So, I don't believe in these like dogmatic approaches where we have to do this, we have to do that. I think we should be flexible. And it really depends on where we're coming from, where our current health status is to where we should dictate, what we do. So that's my opinion.
I like that. I think that when most people see different people, different experts talking, and then they're going to do this, they're going to do this, they're going to, and you get so confused. And yes, for me, my feeding window can be, my fasting window is from 12 to 14 hours, but it depends. Like after this podcast interview, I want to have a snack. and it's
Awesome.
8 p.m. my time, but I know that's how my energy is after an interview in the evening. But then usually I'll have my first meal at 8 or 9 o'clock, finish at about 5 or 6. So, but then if somebody has more weight to lose, especially the visceral fat, shorten it like 6 hours, 8 hours, but make sure you do the exercise. Last question for you pertaining to visceral fat and health supplements. You're a fan of berberine.
I think it's one of the most effective supplements we can take. I mean, there's all kinds of supplements out there, erythrin, creatine, all this. And my bias is I have a supplement manufacturing facility as well as a supplement company. So I help other companies build their formulations and I have my own brand. So that's my bias here. But when it comes to testing out different supplements, we get samples in all the time. I've been in this industry for 19 years. I've tried everything you can think of for blood sugar, from cinnamon to chromium, vanadium, alpha-lipoic acid, all this. And it wasn't until like 2015, well, I've been excited about berberine since 2011. And I started, and based upon the evidence, the research on berberine hydrochloride, historically too, both in India and China, berberine has been used for like 3,000 years. So it has a long safety record, a long track record, but it is really effective for how it influences blood sugar health. And so it's a podcast, we can talk all about it. I mean, it literally drops your blood sugar in real time. And so I remember I was on a plane to give a talk in Toronto. I had a continuous glucose monitor at the time in 2015. It was the Abbott Freestyle Libre. Took 1,000 milligrams of berberine, and then all of a sudden my glucose got down to like 50 milligrams per deciliter. I was like, holy smokes, this is really effective. And then my ketones started to increase. So for people that are struggling to get into ketosis, berberine can be very effective as well. So yeah, it's really impressive. And here's what's even more impressive about it is it's poorly absorbed. It's like you're absorbing maybe like 25% of it, just like with metformin, which is widely prescribed and well recognized to be an effective drug for improving blood sugar and possibly even enhancing longevity and so forth. Metformin is really poorly absorbed. So we're like, well, how is it working? It's affecting the gut. It's affecting the gut microbiota, gut hormones. We hear so much now about GLP-1. So I think when it comes to the mechanisms of berberine affecting these so-called incretin hormones, PYY, GLP-1, GLP-2, and so forth. So yeah, that's what I like about it. It's a supplement it's affordable. Erythrin A, NAD, all these things are like hundreds of dollars a month. Berberine's like $30 a month. And you can really notice the improvements if you test your glucose at home with a finger stick or you wear a CGM. I mean, it's really profound.
Okay, next one, magnesium. Is that good?
Yes. Magnesium is a cofactor for well over 300 enzymatic reactions in the body. You know, about 50% of us are not even hitting the RDA, which is on the lower end of recommended magnesium. Magnesium does so many different things. So definitely something that should be considered. But again, the form really matters. Just like with berberine, there's a lot of adulterated berberine on the market. There's a lot of crappy magnesium products on the market because a lot of companies, there's 6,000 supplement brands. There's maybe like a couple hundred manufacturing facilities. So most of these companies are just marketing agencies and they're just focused on profit margins. And so the cheapest magnesiums are magnesium oxide and magnesium citrate, magnesium gluconate. So that's what most companies throw that in there because the end user just sees magnesium. But the forms that you really want are magnesium bisglycinate chelate, magnesium malate, magnesium threonate, and magnesium taurate. So those are like the four, maybe orotate as well. So there's like four magnesiums that actually are health promoting. The other ones are really just increasing water retention in your colon and helping you have a bowel movement, which is not all a bad thing, but the absorption's not great. But magnesium for women, really important. Tons of research coming out of Belgium on this new magnesium. It's called ATA MAG, magnesium acetyl taurate. Really exciting research for particularly with menstruation-related symptoms around luteal phase for women. So yeah, I think magnesium, we can't talk enough about it. It will be the next vitamin D for sure.
Okay, the last one is vitamin D. What's your thoughts on vitamin D? How much do we actually need for optimal health?
We've been hearing more about vitamin D over the last 20 years. But I think what was really interesting about vitamin D is its relationship with severe COVID outcomes. And so I think that's really important. Not that we're worried about COVID right now necessarily, but just how effective vitamin D is for influencing immune health, especially during the cold and flu season. So I think vitamin D is really important. People that live north of Atlanta, Georgia, here in the U.S., or parts of Northern Europe should probably be supplementing with minimum of 4,000 IUs per day up to 6,000 IUs per day, along with vitamin K2. So I think it's really important. We're not getting it from, cod liver like we maybe used to and things like that. Not many people eat mushrooms, so they're not getting vitamin D. And everyone's scared of the sun now. Not your community, but like most people are covered up, even on a sunny day, wearing, skin sunscreen and so forth. And this time of the year, between October and March in North America, if you're north of Atlanta, Georgia, which is like, I don't know, maybe like 85% of the entire US population, even if you're getting sun exposure, you're not getting the cutaneous synthesis of vitamin D. So yeah, we should be supplementing with this for sure.
Okay, last question. How do you test your visceral fat to see what is your number and what is a good number to have?
And a DEXA or MRI is good.
And what is a good number to have?
Gosh, I think definitely less than a pound, of visceral fat. So it really depends upon your age. As we get older, we tend to accumulate more visceral fat. But I can't tell exactly based upon someone's body weight. It's in relation to the amount of body fat and body weight that you have. But I remember, I think I tested mine, it was like 0.6 or something along those lines, 0.6 pounds. I haven't looked at my DEXA in a while. So I can't tell you exactly how much, but I think I would say less than a pound for sure.
Well, you are damn fit, Mike. I mean, for your age and the way that you look, you are muscly and fit. So I'm sure your visceral fat is going to be zero. Mike, thank you so much for this interview. I think that people will have the right knowledge to fix a visceral fat, but it's not just visceral fat, it's their overall health. I'm going to put all your links in the show notes so that people can find you, support you. Anything that we missed around visceral fat and health that you want to share?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot. Yeah, I had my yerba mate. Sorry if I spoke a little bit too fast here, but
is that caffeinated?
It is, yeah. I've been drinking mate for a while. It's from Brazil, so I got into it in college and just never looked back. It's a cool like green tea alternative. Nice.
Well, I quit caffeine 2 weeks ago, so I'm like zero caffeine.
I wish I could quit caffeine. It's one of the drugs that I like. So I like coffee and yerba mate. Yeah, I live in Seattle, Washington. It's like dark. Between now and March, it's like the weather's terrible. So we need some, stimulant to keep us going here.
I live in Dubai. It's like hot and sunshine every single day. Well, Mike, thank you so much for your time. All the links are going to be in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today on this episode with Mike Mutzel. Now, if you want to learn more about a visceral fat from the wonderful Dr. Eric Berg, check out this video. It is packed full of his best 61 tips. Finally, thank you for your interest in root cause healing, and I'll see you next week.